So Elena, can you tell us a bit of something about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to be at Google August 3rd, so I've got a couple of weeks before I'm officially a software
All right.
engineer there. But I started off at UCLA. I actually chose UCLA because I was a student athlete there. So I was in my last year, I was co-captain of the varsity women's swim team. So that's kind of why someone from Nashville went all the way to LA to a public school where I had to pay out-of-state tuition. But I was a varsity athlete at UCLA. I mostly decided to do computer science. I'd like to think it's because, well, I liked problem solving, and then I also was mostly just ambitious. I wanted to do something that was hard, that was really going to push me. And I think ultimately part of me just wanted to do something impressive, which is pretty kind of selfish. But I knew that I didn't know exactly what I wanted to go into, but I knew that computer science was a part of anything that I could possibly go into. So that was my thought process there. I came into UCLA with zero programming experience. My high school didn't even have AP computer science. But I kind of just, I don't even know looking back at it how I kept doing it. I was kind of so bad starting out. But I think just having determination during those times when it was hard at the beginning was especially helpful. And then I did some work just with my dad's company after my freshman year. So my freshman summer, I did a little bit of like just a very small project that I worked on for a couple of weeks. And then my sophomore year, I went to the Grace Hopper conference for women in technology. And at that conference, at the Intel booth, I was eating lunch, and then one of the Intel recruiters like gave me an Intel pen and was like, "Oh, come by the booth." So I ended up going there, and they didn't have any recruiters left, so I ended up having to talk to a manager and got an internship through that. And then the next year, with a referral, I got an internship at Microsoft, and then the next year, also with a referral, I got an internship at Amazon. And then the next year, I actually did not get a return offer from Amazon. I was really disappointed, but I was actually, after that, it kind of gave me more motivation to do well on full-time interviews. So I studied probably 2 hours a day for a month. So there was like half of the month I was in school, so I studied like 1 hour a day, but I was on a 2 week vacation in Spain since my dad's from Spain, and my dad knew that it was important to me to do well, so we kind of spent 4 hours a day in the Starbucks, like every day of the whole vacation, studying for technical interviews. I ended up having about 37 interviews that year, just because I had applied to a lot of places because I was nervous that I wouldn't have a job because I didn't have that return offer. And then I ended up passing about 70% of my interviews. So I had offers from Square, Microsoft, Samsara, Disney Imagineering, and Google. And now I'll be going to Google.
All right. Yeah, that sounds really great. So I want to ask. You went through almost 37 interviews, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how was that? How was it emotionally and
Yeah,
all?
I think one of the things, because I had studied so much, so I had gotten to the point where it's like I had confidence going into interviews, so it wasn't too stressful, especially because there were a lot of companies that I knew. It was better once I had that first offer. So before that first offer, I was really nervous. But then after I got that first offer from Square, I was like, okay, you can breathe now a little bit. And it took a lot of the pressure off. And I think I did a lot better in interviews once I had that pressure off. Because I had really liked my internship at Microsoft and I knew I'd be really happy at Microsoft. I had a bunch of friends in Seattle. So going into my Google interviews with a Microsoft offer made it so that I didn't have super high expectations of the Google ones. I was pretty relaxed, and I think that helped. I mean, the
Mm,
studying for 2 hours a day helped a lot more than that, but it helped a little.
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. I think it's also for some of us it's daunting to go through interviews, a lot of interviews, and to think that it's 37. So, um, you mentioned earlier that you got into different companies like after the GHC. After that, you got into companies by referral. So can you share to us how were you able to network with those people, and can you share some tips on how to network properly?
Yeah, I think one of the things that was really an advantage to be at a university like UCLA was you were kind of surrounded by people. So I never actively reached out to people and networked. It was kind of like friends I had in my classes had interned at these places. So while they're at the internship, I would ask them, like, hey, can you give me a referral? I think my Microsoft referral was given to me without asking. It was just one of my friends who was there, and she's like, oh, I'll give out referrals. And then with the Amazon one, I did actively search them out, but I had a group of friends in Seattle who some of them were Amazon, some of them were Microsoft. So I kind of just asked my Amazon friends if it could be put in a referral. But some of the most effective, just from like having people message me on LinkedIn, I think some of the most effective ones are either like talking about wanting to learn more about the person or wanting to go on a phone call. I think most people are not nice enough to go on a phone call with random people, but I am. So, well, not that everybody should come call me, but I got to open the door on that one. But just having like, there was somebody who was saying like, oh, I just switched from a math major. Could you talk to me about like what your projects were at these companies? And I was happy to do that, especially because I'm bored, but not bored enough for everybody to call me. Okay, don't I don't want all these messages saying like call me, call me. I now only have access to one company's referrals, and I need to know you better. But I'd say just like reaching out to people, maybe earlier. So maybe if you had like if you were happen to be have a LinkedIn connection that worked at Google or something like that, maybe reach out to them before recruiting time, so it's not as obvious that like, hey, I only want a referral from you. I think it's difficult without having. I was very lucky to have like those friends around me that just so happen to go to those places. But I think expanding your circle to kind of befriend more people. I don't really like how people formally talk about networking because it seems so forced. It's kind of just like I have friends. Like, that's pretty much what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm curious. You mentioned earlier you were part of a varsity team, right? So like, and I know a lot of people like have a hard time balancing all the things in their life. So how were you able to pull through with being a varsity and being a great student?
Yeah, I think. Well, you don't know my grades. I could have been awful. No, I think one of the things, I think the biggest thing was just being disciplined. So it's like, while other people could maybe like stay up all night doing a project, I couldn't really do that because I had practice at 6 a.m. the next day. So I really had to make sure on the weekends and whenever I had free time, I was working. It was pretty much all the time, but it was nice because I spread myself out. So like when I was in the recruiting process, it was between like UCLA and a couple of Ivy League schools. I think the thing that drove me to UCLA was that the Ivy League doesn't allow you to do more than 4 years, like no matter what, even if you redshirt a year. So being able to do those 5 years and spread the coursework out was definitely super helpful because I was able to do fewer classes each quarter. And then also I was allowed to have that made it so that once I was done swimming, I had that 5th year. So I had a 5th year that I could spend, and I spent it kind of acting like a freshman at UCLA. Like I would join every single club just because I like didn't have the opportunity to before. So I think the biggest thing was I sacrificed not being able to do extracurriculars that normal people do, like um, doing clubs and like outside projects and things like that.
Okay. We really see how it's important to be disciplined also, and especially that we're in the tech. It's not an easy job to learn coding and understanding like the basics and fundamentals of that. So with that, my question is, um, what is the experience like? Because you mentioned that you didn't have background in high school, software engineering background or computer science background in high school. So how are you able to deal with that, given that
Deal
you had a lot of commitments?
Yeah. So, like, are you talking specifically about like dealing with not having as much coding experience?
Yeah, and like to on top of that, your commitments to other to swimming, for
Yeah.
example. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think one of the things was I knew that my goal was to like get through the degree. Like, like C's get degrees. I mean, I wanted to do well, but I knew that even like I was not going to come in and be the best. So setting that expectation and knowing that like I know I'm competitive, but I know I'm not going to be the best and I'm just going to do the best that I can do. That was really helpful, like just doing my best and working hard. I think it's because um, I am competitive, and I was like, this is something nobody else is doing. Like when I would go to class, I'd be like, okay, these people are better than me at coding, but I can swim. So it was like something that made it so that I didn't worry too much about having worse grades because I knew I was doing this other thing outside of CS that was making my like experience a lot more difficult than other people. So I think if I had come in and just done computer science without being an athlete, would have put a lot more pressure on myself to like do really well in school, and I might have gotten discouraged because I was expecting an A. When it's harder to get an A when everybody in your class has already been coding since they were 12.
Okay. Yeah, I really like your confidence
Yeah.
with how you deal with things.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't think being competitive is that good. It's much better to be happy with what you're doing without comparing to other people, but it got me through it.
That's true. That's true. Okay.
So, would you give any tips to young people on how to develop a competitive mindset?
Competitive mindset. I think one of the best things to do is like the hardest thing is kind of staying motivated. Like a lot of the things we talked about in swimming was kind of like developing habits and getting like 1% better each day. And I think one of the hardest things, especially with studying for interviews, was that there would be days where you felt like you weren't improving at all, and there would be days where it felt like you were improving a ton. And the most important thing is that on those days, on those bad days, you keep going. So even if it's not, if you feel like you're not learning anything or you're not doing a good job, just keep pushing through because eventually you'll get better if you're putting in time and effort.
Okay. So speaking of advice, what could you also tell those people who are like still unsure about what they want to do, but like are leaning towards the computer science or like the tech field to pursue a career in the tech industry?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's kind of counterintuitive to everything I've said before, but don't compare yourself to other people. Make sure that you know that it doesn't matter if you're the best developer. Like if you're just coming into it, the world needs millions of developers, and there's only one best developer. So it doesn't make sense to like compare yourself to people who are better because you're in your own journey. I think I think if you're on the fence, I think go for it because you can always kind of go back to other things that might be easier, but you can't. I mean, you probably couldn't like just learn pre-med on the side, but like you can sometimes like some like CS. I feel like you can do so much with the degree, but it's like any of your passions will involve computer science. And once you're at a company, you can always switch to being something that might not need that technical expertise. I think would be my advice.
Okay. Okay.
So,
That's something
do
to
it.
really think about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what is one of the toughest things you had to go through in your journey to becoming a software engineer?
Toughest things I had to go through. I think just kind of feeling ostracized a little bit in my earlier classes, especially as a public university. UCLA has a lot of local people. And I don't know if that's why everybody was friends with each other, but everybody was friends with each other, it seemed like. And I was it felt really like I was doing everything alone. And it's kind of like me versus groups of people who know each other who are helping each other. It's like I'm not going to be the best. Like there's no way. So it's kind of difficult when it came to like studying and pushing through and persevering. But it's interesting because I was kind of like just naive to it all. Like I would hear the group of people behind me saying like, "Oh, did you finish the project yet?" And I was like, "That project came out yesterday. Like I have 20 hours left." Um, just hearing them say those things, it was discouraging. But just knowing that like you can do it, and you can kind of learn anything as long as you put in the effort, really kept me going.
Mm. Well, speaking of projects, can you tell us what's your favorite project that you've worked on?
Favorite project? I'd say my favorite project was my internship project because again, I didn't have as much time for like passion projects when I was an undergrad because I had to swim all the time, so I didn't really have time for that. But my favorite project was my project at Microsoft. They just had a database that I was converting into a graph, and the graph software was super interesting and super fun. Yeah.
Mm.
Super interesting, super fun, very technical explanation. I don't know how much I'm allowed to say about exactly what tools they use or anything, but it was really interesting because it was an interesting way to kind of visualize data, and because I was supposed to essentially just find business insights, which like that's very vague, but just like looking through the data and trying to find significant things that justified the use of the graph tool.
Okay, okay. So those are interesting. And we want to learn more, but I'm not sure if that's possible. So can you just tell us about your experience of interning for multiple companies like before, like Microsoft and the others that you mentioned?
Yeah, I'd say definitely when you're interning, pay a lot of attention to the culture of the companies. So for me, I really liked Intel. I was kind of like not, I had nothing to compare it to. But I really liked the people I was working with. I might not have had like, there were no other interns that I knew. I was working in Austin, Texas, so I only really knew the people working there, and I really liked them. So I didn't realize that like other internships had these groups of interns doing all these crazy things. Um, but I don't know. I'm very easily pleased. So it's kind of like I just love problem solving no matter where I am. So that's pretty much I try to make the most of any situation. I think at Microsoft I really liked that what I found essentially at my internships was the company culture kind of radiates around what the CEO is saying. So it's like if you look at Satya Nadella from Microsoft, he's like preaching inclusivity and like the importance of a growth mindset and things like that. And that really makes you feel really welcome there and that you can learn things and get better. And then you have Jeff Bezos and the leadership principles, and one of them is be right a lot, which is like, okay, like don't learn, just be right. So I think that was definitely true at the companies. And at Amazon, there were higher expectations. So at Microsoft, I was kind of welcomed to ask questions, and at Amazon, it kind of seemed like questions were them seeing my ability through the questions that I asked. And kind of judging my ability based on the questions I asked, which I didn't really like as much. I am hoping that Google is better. I think they are a little bit better at kind of growth mindset, maybe not at the level that Microsoft's at. But for me, the choice of Google over Microsoft, even though I love Microsoft culture so much, was just because I knew that having Google on my resume would allow me to do whatever I wanted in the future. And as I said, I'm very easily pleased. So it's kind of like I make the most of any situation. So even if I don't particularly like the culture as much, there are actually contributions that everybody can make that can make the culture more of what you want. And that's what I've learned being on the swim team, because even the freshmen can have an influence on the culture of the team.
Okay, yeah, that's cool. So could we ask what was your favorite internship so far?
Favorite internship so far? I'd say it was Microsoft. It's just I had a good group of friends. And I am not super adventurous, but they were like crazy adventurous. Like one of them refused to go on a hike if it was less than 6 miles. So we just spent days and days doing hikes. But it was a lot of fun. I guess a lot of the memories from these internships are non-technical. I don't know what that says about me. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. And my manager like really thought that I could really pushed me to do a lot. So I actually I was doing the internship and they gave me this project with the graphs and the database. And then he said like, oh, would you want to do Scrum Master training so that you can kind of practice being more in a manager position on your team, which was super interesting to me. And like, wow, like you're an intern and you're learning like managerial stuff. That's pretty cool. So I did the Scrum Master training and they actually ended up turning my project into a team. So for the last part of my internship, I got to act as the Scrum Master for my team.
Okay.
Sounds
that sounds pretty cool. A pretty cool experience. Okay, VR.
Well, I have a question in mind. Well, for the audience, if you guys have a question, you guys can ask here through chat or we have. I think we have some upcoming questions here from the audience.
Okay, I see resume tips.
Yes.
A resume tip: do not put skills and list languages. For Amazon, Python, and they're like, Python was on your resume, and I was like, I learned it in a week. I don't know it that well. But have them see if there are languages that you know really well that aren't shown in projects or listed somewhere else on your resume, then that makes sense. This is more of a personal thing. Like if you haven't done very many projects and you want to show which languages you're competent in, I was kind of told by a recruiter one time, like it's better to have those kind of in the projects to see like how you use those languages as opposed to just a like list of languages that you know, and never put like 5 stars if you're doing a 5-star rating system. Like at Amazon there were senior engineers and they're like, oh, I think I know C++ a 6 out of 10. And you have like undergrads saying like, oh, I know 9 out of 10. It's like, no, you don't.
All right.
Okay.
So another question here is how long did you work with Microsoft?
Yeah, 3-month internship.
And M. Gale here is asking if it's mandatory to use Windows laptop in Microsoft.
I think you can ask permission to change it. I don't exactly remember, but you are given by default a Windows laptop, yes.
So how was that? Are you a Windows user or an Apple user or
Windows?
Maybe.
Yeah, Windows for sure. I think it's just because my dad is anti-Apple. Because like, when we got iPods, he was like, "Oh, like I hate that the music is so constrained, and you have to have everything in this like Apple environment." So we didn't do Apple. I think we did like Amazon Music for a while, and now we've bumped up to YouTube Music because he wanted to like be able to download them to have them somewhere else. But that's pretty much why. I think it was not the best for college because everybody else had Macs and the TAs had Macs when they were grading things. So sometimes I was kind of like docked points for compiler differences if there wasn't something that we could use like a Linux server for or something.
Okay, we have another experience here from. We have another question here from Fran. Sorry, She said, "Hi Alina, I'm Fran from Festa. We are one of the startup sponsor in GHC this year, and it's virtual. Advice on how to maximize the GHC experience
for people or for students or for like a company?
I think for students.
Like, I was about to say like throw parties. Like that's what everybody like they throw parties at GHC. Well, I guess not virtually. But there was one that I went to with StubHub. This is not answering the question, but there was one I went to with StubHub where it was like at a zoo and they had like you could interact with the penguins. Google rents out Epcot. They have lots of parties to get people to go places. I'd say definitely put your resume in the resume database. Like that's number one. Like that's the number one thing you should do. Even if you're not planning on going, it's open to anybody, women or men, anybody. Open to all genders. And then I'd say make sure you're like applying to things and look at your email beforehand. It's really difficult because like I had very different experiences. Like once you have companies like Intel, Microsoft, Amazon on your resume, your experience isn't going to be the same as a beginner because you're going to start getting emails to ask you to apply for things. Like I had 27 or the 37 interviews, and I think I only applied online to like 2 places. So those were all like companies reaching out to me, or at the career fair, me going to booths. I think one of the companies I had, I think it was kind of my only one. It's interesting because I thought that you like it wasn't easy to get interviews once you were there. Like you had to have the interviews scheduled beforehand. So that's why it's so important to look at your email and apply online to these things. Um, but I think a lot of people do get interviews there. It's usually just at smaller companies. So like places like Facebook, Microsoft, Google. I never had a Grace Hopper interview with Google, so I don't know. But they kind of have almost everything filled. And then if you're like spectacular, they have room for you. They have like 2 or 3 spots that are available. But for the most part, they have all their interviews scheduled beforehand. I usually have like almost sometimes even like upwards of like 6 or 7 interviews scheduled beforehand. Maybe more like 4 or 5, but then it ends up getting more towards the 8 range if you have like callback interviews from places or anything like that. I would say, I don't know, not sure exactly how to maximize it, especially virtually. I would say definitely go to all the booths. Like that would be something that would be helpful because even an internship and experience at a smaller company will help you if your goal is to get to bigger companies later on.
Okay. That's really good advice, actually. And I think that would help all those girls who are inspired, who want to be in the GHC or attend the GHC. Okay. Again, if you have any questions, okay, just please feel free to message it in the chat box or open your mic and cam and interact with Alina. Okay.
Yeah, so I don't see little circles. They're all just anonymous little circles judging me.
So, Elena, would you give, what tips would you give for people who are, because you went through a lot of people in computer science, they build their resume, they build their profiles by working on side projects, small projects, passion projects. So, but that wasn't the case for you. So, like, how would you, how would you, what tips would you give for other people on building their profiles?
Yeah, I think for when it comes to side projects, I'd definitely do something that you're passionate about and want to be doing later. So don't do something that just has a buzzword just to have a buzzword on there. Because when they're choosing a team for you when you're an intern, they're going to look at that and that's going to be your experience. And they're going to say, oh, let's align them with their experience. And now that language is also what you did for your internship project. So you will never escape. It'll always be that you will have to do that sort of thing. For me, my internship projects were always languages I didn't know beforehand, except Python. But I'd say, so I don't know if they exactly align you with what you have experience with. Maybe internships don't, and that's why I got something random each time. I always assumed it was because I knew C++ and nothing they were doing used C++. Yeah, so definitely make it something that you're interested in. I don't know. I don't know. I don't have too much experience in that side of things.
Okay, I actually have a question. So we've been hearing that you went into the tech industry without any prior experience and you had to build on that yourself. So my question is, did you ever feel or have in the imposter syndrome, and how did you deal with that?
Yeah, I think I definitely had imposter syndrome with my first internship. Like when I got it, I was like, why do I deserve this? Everybody else had to do like technical interviews. But a lot of the times that first internship, because people would kind of say like, oh, like you just got that at the Grace Hopper conference. They just give a lot of internships there. And it's like, well, how did you get your first internship? And they said like, oh, my dad's company. It's like, well, that's like almost worse. Like getting that first one usually is not going to be the same experience, and just knowing that like nobody really knows what they're doing. Like they're like senior software engineers, they know what they're doing, but with undergrad, not ever, like people don't really know, like don't assume other people know everything. This might have just been me comparing myself to other people all the time, but make sure that you're confident in the things that you know, and know that like not everybody knows everything and you can learn anything. I think that's the biggest thing, is like you can learn anything if you put in enough time and effort. And just believing that that's true, then you don't feel as much imposter syndrome, because it feels like you are performing because you're putting in that time and effort and getting better and seeing yourself improve.
Okay. That's an advice that everyone, especially college students, can relate to, because it's really daunting to go into the tech industry fresh out of school, and like everyone else there has experience, while college students feel like they're not enough yet, or they don't add up yet. So that's a good advice.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely, Google has imposter syndrome workshops, because kind of everybody at Google is like crazy good, so you're going to feel bad. I think I felt a little bit that in the recruiting process, because I was so devastated by not getting that return offer from Amazon, because it's kind of like, it's different when you get rejected by a company, because it's like, oh, they didn't know me that well. It was just like 2 one-hour interviews. But when it's people you were with for months and they saw like how you were doing, and then they still thought it wasn't good enough, I think that I feel a little bit of imposter syndrome in getting these offers, because it's like, I didn't really become a better developer. I just got better at interviews. But I think now I kind of know that I believe in myself, and I believe that I can learn whatever I need to be good. So I still have that worry going into things, but it's definitely not as big of a worry.
Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah, so we can see that Google really advocates for and cares for their employees, no? Okay. Do you have any questions, VR?
Okay. JJ here has a question. How to network?
How to network? Make friends. Be social. This is one thing that, especially in the tech industry, it's not emphasized, but social skills are skills too. Like there are skills that you can learn, just like technical skills. So just knowing that that's a skill and improving them will help you kind of make small talk with people and become friends with people, which essentially is what networking is. Even though it's hard,
Definitely.
virtual, you can't really make small talk on LinkedIn messaging.
What advice would you give to? Yeah, what advice would you give to those introverts who are scared to talk to people, or like not as extroverted as you?
Yeah, that's fun. The rest of the swim team, I'm an introvert. I'd say don't be afraid to put yourself out of your comfort zone. I think a lot of the times it's easy to kind of get down on yourself and not want to interact with people, but the worst case scenario for putting yourself out there is just like someone ignoring you, or kind of flat out rejecting you and not wanting to talk to you, and that's really not that bad. It's something that's kind of easy to get over. From someone who like had to swim and be outside of my comfort zone all the time, I kind of think of mental like setbacks as not as painful, because if you had like a setback in the water, you're like dying. Like I don't know. I think it's just that physical pain I think of as a lot worse than mental pain in a sense. So if the worst case scenario is you get rejected or anything like that, it's not too bad, and just putting yourself out there more will make each setback seem less grave. Does that make sense? I don't know. Just to go out of your comfort zone.
For sure. That makes sense. Yeah. Okay, yeah, and like being in the tech industry itself is already putting yourself out of your comfort zone for
Mhm.
a lot. And so yeah, I think it's really important to build your confidence as you grow, especially in college, because that's where you get to interact with people your age and people the same ideals as you.
Yeah.
Yes. So, Elena, would you try to encourage our audience to ask more questions to you?
You don't know anything? I'm not going to answer any of your questions on LinkedIn DMs. You guys know. I can
So,
tell some horror stories about interviews.
could, could you share us that?
What?
Can you share us more of your interview stories?
More of my interview stories. Well, there was one interview. I'm not going to, since this will be on YouTube, I will not disclose the company. I mean, you know what the outcome. But it was an interview after Grace Hopper, my sophomore year, because that's when I went to Grace Hopper. And I had no idea what technical interviews were at that point, so I objectively failed like all of the technical interviews. Like beforehand, everybody was studying, and I was like, "Why are you studying? I know how to talk to people." And then I was like, "Oh shoot, these are like technical." Um, so I was like failing everything, and I had this phone call, and the first half was technical, and the last half was behavioral. And in the first half, like I completely failed. So I like expected the behavioral questions to be like not good because it's like, okay, I failed. Like the interviewer already thinks I'm stupid, so it's fine. But then the first question he asked was, what weighs more, a pound of feathers or a pound of iron? Like, they weigh the same? Like I had no idea. It was just like such a bad question. And then he asked like, it says here on your resume you're good at time management. Could you explain that? And I was like, well, I'm a Division I student athlete engineer. And he's like, well, just doing a bunch of things doesn't mean you're good at them. And I was like, what? He's like, just doing a bunch of things doesn't mean you're good at time management. And I was like, thank you, because at that point he didn't know how fast I swam. For all he knew, I was really bad at CS from what he saw on the technical side, and I was really bad at like meaning he could have guessed that I was really bad at swimming and just saying like you're just stretching yourself too thin. And then he kind of convinced me as to why I shouldn't be swimming. And then he had a political question. And it was just like not questions that are like these people need to be trained on what behavioral questions are. And that was really bad.
Okay, okay. Speaking of your experience in interview, Nodem here has a question, and he or she asked, when they called you for a job interview, what was the most difficult question that they asked you?
The most difficult question that I was asked.
Yeah.
I think if you're familiar with Leak Code, I did get one Leak Code hard problem from one of the companies. But for the most part, they were, I would say almost like, it probably is like 85% Leak Code easy and like 10% Leak Code medium and then that 5% hard. Did that add up right? Yeah. Yeah, I think for the most part, especially for internships, people come to me and they're like, "Oh, I only have 2 weeks to study. Should I like just do a bunch of Leak Code medium?" I'm like, "No, I try to when I do some interview prep. I was part of a club at UCLA that helped people with interviews. Um, I like to think of it as kind of like a dartboard. So like the outer side, like the whole outer part, is like Leak Code easy, like depth first search, breadth first search, like basic things that you should know. And then they're like, it's kind of like a bullseye board with like a bunch of different bullseyes on it, but all those bullseyes are like tiny little parts of the board. And that's like the probability that you're going to get like one topological sort problem that's a Leak Code medium. It's like if you're throwing the dart, you want to increase your chances by doing those big chunks instead of like trying to go for those tiny darts and try to like guess what they're going to ask you, because it's better to just have to be able to talk through maybe non-optimal solutions, but solutions that show that you know what you're talking about when it comes to data structures and algorithms.
Okay, okay.
All right. All right. From the audience. Oops. Final call to ask your questions. Last chance to open your mics.
Justin here is asking the audience can connect with you on LinkedIn.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I'm not going to
Okay,
call all of you, but I guess I don't know
I'll
who's
send
here,
them.
so I guess you could try.
All right. We'll
How about I
definitely
say,
connect
we
with
Okay.
you.
can on LinkedIn and unmute and ask a question. Then we'll get a
Yes.
lot of unmute. But yes, feel free to add me on LinkedIn.
All right. All right, audiences. It's your time to, step out of your comfort zone.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Stop doing such an introvert network.
Yeah, definitely. All
For
right.
sure, there are questions there. Come on, guys. I know you have good questions.
All right.
Any questions?
Um,
Not even like, what did you eat as a swimmer? I feel like that's everybody's question. I did not eat the Michael Phelps diet, but one day in high school, when I had two practices, I wanted to see how much I could eat, like maximum, and I got to 6,000 calories. Every meal was not like every meal was something I had eaten before, but usually if I had a big breakfast, I wouldn't have a big lunch, but I had like my biggest breakfast, my biggest lunch, my biggest dinner. And then at the end, I was like at 5,900. And I was so full that I just like had a Gatorade to get up to 6,000.
Okay. Oh wait, I have a question.
Oh, good.
So how important was your swimming career for you to survive being in the tech industry? Because I think people need also creative outlets to
Mhm.
just instead of being just in that little hole of being coding, doing code. So how important was swimming for you as a creative outlet?
Yeah, I think it wasn't too much. I don't think of it as much as a creative outlet. I think of it more as like something that really helps my discipline later on. I think it was kind of an escape. Like I had to, right now, I kind of have too much time. Like after I stopped swimming, I had too much time. So it's like, when are you supposed to start your homework? Like, oh, well, I have 8 hours. I can start it like 7 hours from now. But if you have that chunk of time that's dedicated to practice, it kind of forces you to make those smaller chunks useful and get things done. I'd say it was more of an escape, and I think it was. I don't know. It was painful. In case you haven't heard from what I've been saying about physical pain, if you're not out of your comfort zone at swim practice, you're not doing it right. So people who say it's not painful aren't pushing themselves hard enough. Yeah, I'd say it was a good. I think it was mostly a good way to kind of have multiple sources of my identity. Because a lot of people like identify I am a CS major, and if your entire identity is that you're a CS major and you get a B in a CS class, you might be really upset and kind of think down on yourself. But one of the things that swimming really taught me is that um, swimming is just something you do. It's not who you are. So coding is something you do, not who you are. So if you feel like you're not as good at coding, it doesn't mean that you as a person are not as good. It's just that that skill that you've developed needs improvement. And I think, again, what I've been saying a million times, time and effort can make it better.
Okay, okay. Thank you for that. That's a really good insight. Um, okay, I guess we have no more questions from the audience. Last call.
all
Last
right.
time to ask Elena. Okay, okay,
Well, if there
okay.
is none, I guess we can proceed with our concluding questions.
Oh my gosh, I thought y'all were like done. Oh, concluding questions. They got secret questions.
All right. So, well, for our first concluding question is, what is it that you think you still lack right now that would further help you in, advancing in your career and advancing, in your future endeavors?
What do I think I don't have now? I think like very short term, I don't know Java and I need to know Java for my job. That's something that's very like short term. I think one thing that I don't have now is just the development experience. So like I've had these internships, yes, but I haven't like grown up coding, and that's something I can't change. Like how I grew up, and that I grew up not coding, and I grew up swimming instead of coding. That's something I can't change now, but in the future, I think I try to kind of make my current self my best version of myself so that I know that I will continue to learn and grow. So right now I might not have that development experience, but when I will be developing full time, I know that that confidence will increase and I'll get better at that. I think I also now have
All
a couple
right.
habits of like watching YouTube for a couple hours. That's something that's hindering me at the moment.
Okay, okay.
All right.
So for the next concluding question, what is something you wish you knew when you started going into the tech industry?
What a technical interview was. I think that would have been helpful. I think knowing that um, you can kind of I think one of the things that I thought going into it was like, oh, all these people are so good going in and they probably are making unique algorithms that nobody's ever seen before. And then when you go, you realize that like these advanced algorithms are things you can learn. And the only people making like really, really advanced new algorithms are PhDs. So while people walk around and they like think they're geniuses and they know all these algorithms, like you can learn those too. So pretty much, I think what I would um, say is like you can learn anything, and you can learn what you think the people around you know and you don't.
Okay,
All
okay.
right. Sounds that sounds great. All right. If the audience still doesn't have questions, then we have a final question for you.
Oh wait,
Uh,
there's a question here.
all right. There's a
There's a
question.
question here
All
by
right, from
Teddy.
Teddy. So what kind of personality and qualities do you need to have to become a developer?
Okay, what kind of personality and qualities? I think the number one thing for me, I think, is a growth mindset. So like knowing that like what I've been saying the whole time that like you can learn anything. I mean, not anything. Like I don't think I could master like extremely, extremely advanced like PhD physics. But I think with enough time and enough passion for it, I potentially could. I'd say there aren't necessarily any personality qualities. I am very much not the stereotypical personality of a developer. Um, and I've had success so far. um, but I'd say whatever your personality is and qualities are. I think the biggest thing is just being able to put in work would be the biggest quality. Again, a growth mindset because everybody's constantly learning. Right when you're an expert of one language, a new one will come out. Um, So yeah, a lot of it is about learning because a lot of the times you're going to be put on teams that you don't know very much about. So as long as you have the quality of being willing to learn and open to asking other people questions and not having too much of an ego to tell yourself that you need to put in effort, or having an ego to tell yourself you don't have to put in effort. If you don't have that ego, then that's good. Um, just a growth mindset. That's pretty much it.
All right. Do you have plans on taking graduate studies? Oh,
Eventually, I might want to do an MBA if I wanted to get into management. I had the opportunity through UCLA. There's a GPA requirement to get a master's, and I met that requirement, but I decided that it wasn't really worth it for me because I didn't really have an area that I really wanted to research in. And then I also was thinking that I might get an MBA later, and having two master's degrees seemed kind of excessive.
uh, all right. Um. All right. If all right, then I will ask you the final question.
Wow, y'all just have like a tier of questions. Preliminary, beginner, advanced, final, PS, final.
All right. So the final question is it's easy. If you were in our position, hosting and asking you questions, what would you have asked yourself?
What would I ask myself? Maybe like, what motivates you? Do I have to answer it though? I don't have to answer it. I would ask a hard question. For anybody who's doing interviews, I have a go-to interview question. That is, if you could change one thing about the culture of of the company you're at, what would you change? I think a lot of the times when you tell people to like describe the culture of a company, they just talk about the good things, and the good things of all these companies are usually the same. But you get a lot more variation when asking people like, what would you change? Because then you see like the actual things in the culture that might not be the best, and that's what would be a drawback to going somewhere. In terms of what's my motivation, I think for me, like a lot of people in my generation, I want to make an impact. And I think for me personally, I thought that the best way to make an impact was to kind of push myself. I think with CS you can make an impact, but my idea is like if I wanted to go to a company that maybe has more of a focus on giving back, going to Google would be a good way to put myself in a position to be there. And I think computer science has the possibility to make great improvements on society, and could hurt society, but having the people there that focus on the improvements, I think, is important.
All right. Sounds amazing. Yeah. Yeah, I feel I relate with that. Me personally, I also want to make an impact in the things that I do. So
Yeah,
yeah.
very cool.
Well,
I'm
Yeah,
getting a flood of LinkedIn requests. Hello. Hopefully not phone call requests. I dug myself a hole with that one.
all right.
Okay, goodbye, little green dots.
All
Hope
right.
you didn't
So
press you too hard behind the black squares.
thank you everyone for coming to our Tech Talk series,
Thank
and thank
you.
you, Elena, for
thank
reaching
you,
out to
Lina.
us,
You're
and
welcome.
it was great talking with you.
Yeah,
It was great to meet you, and hopefully this won't be the last time we'll hear from you.
Good. Okay,
All
I'll
right.
take
yeah.
back
Thank you
and
so much.
why people want questions answered.
All right.
I'm sure once there are like three dots, then they'll talk.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, Lina. You had really insightful. You had really insightful points in the talk.
Thank
So thank you so much for
you.
getting into the call, and thank you everyone.
Yeah.
Don't forget to join our next podcast session.
Yeah. That means leave everybody
Goodbye.
Bye.
with my question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh my gosh!
Oh.
Oh wait, she's part of Fiesta. She doesn't count.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Lena, people will start connecting with you at LinkedIn now.
Yes. Yes, I'll start refreshing the page. Okay, we've got 0.
I will be connecting with you as well.
We gotta at least get that one person who asked in the chat. See, we'll see who leaves by seeing who is paying attention, because maybe they're just like zoned out and like don't know that it's over. Or these people all have questions.
Yes.
We'll see. Okay, we'll start calling y'all out. Calling y'all by name. Looking at you, Teddy, Juliet, DF. Maybe they're like passively listening and they'll hear their name and they'll be like, oh no. Gotta leave. Oh, you can send private messages. Hopefully nobody's been sending me private messages.
Yes, I think you can send private message.
Okay.
You can raise hands as well.
Oh. Oh my gosh, somebody wants to speak.
Yeah, that's me.
Oh. Why does it say that? When does it say that?
When you raise your hand, there's a raise hand option.
I said,
I
oh.
think.
Okay, people, what are y'all doing here?
So people not yet leaving. Bye guys.
Yeah, bye.
Show is over.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's gonna have a question. Okay, I'll head out then.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Nice
That'll
meeting
motivate
you.
Bye.
me.
Nice
Bye-bye.
meeting
Bye
you.
bye. Nice to
Go on,
meet you.
stay in front of people. You got me on LinkedIn. I've gotten 0 requests so far, so not sticking to your word.
All right.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye
Thank you
bye.
so much.